To my class. All right, so we're recording. So in my experience, we all write, tons of code. I think the Excel module that I have has a couple thousand lines of code.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of work to keep your head around, right? So what we do, or typically what's done from a developer perspective, is we break things into separate script files, we put them into modules, and we use functions, okay? So when you have your script, is the idea that you have, like, you just got to run that every day and it generates like a new Excel files or updates data, or you give that script to somebody else to run? How are you envisioning that?
I'm going to give it to somebody else to run. So kind of the way that it works now is they'll have a bunch of SKUs, and I'm going to try not to dive too much into this, but they have a bunch of SKUs and product codes that they enter in, and the combinations that they have with all the ones that are existing are almost endless. There's endless amounts of codes that they could do, and they're still adding them every so often. So with the more codes, there's more combinations and henceforth more products. So I would provide this file to somebody else, and it would just be between me and two other people over at the company that would be using it. But I'd be providing it to other people, and they would be generating files whenever new products exist.
Okay. So that means if they run into some problems, you're going to have to go in and figure out why your script didn't do the right thing.
Absolutely.
So by modularizing your stuff, which is a different different type of thinking, you make it easier to pinpoint when things happen and go wrong. And also in your code, this is not, and by no means when I say these things are not, I'm not pointing at you and criticizing, but there's no error management, stuff like that. So you could run into problems where I'm not going to go into error management today, but that's something to consider down the road, okay? And taking your 800-line script and then starting to say, okay, oh, wow, I need to put this in a function. I need to put these in set. As you start to break it apart and make it more reusable or make it easier to work with potentially, excuse me, you're going to introduce errors and bugs into your code, right? So, you might feel like, oh, wow, I've got this 1,000-line script. Let me just leave it alone because it works. You know what I mean? So that's going to be up to you. All right. So I wanted to go over some basics. And if you know this stuff, great. Just let me know. I don't want to go too much into, it's your dollar and I don't want to spend too much time on it. So if you think I'm going down the rabbit hole too much, and you just say, hey, Doug, that's good enough. Let's go over here. So I know you talked about that you wanted to look at hash tables, but before we jump into that, can we talk about like some basic PowerShell stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay. So so there's like a core of things that we do in PowerShell so that we as creators, so we are the developers and creators of scripts that we give to other people. And these are good things to know. Do you know about get item?
Or a little bit.
Or how about like even better, get command?
Yeah, get command.
Right. So that shows you everything you have that's in your PowerShell session, right? So one of the things you can do with get command, there's a bunch of things you can do. First off, you know that there's aliases in PowerShell, right?
Yeah.
It's awesome. So we're getting through this quicker. So if I do GCM for get command, I can even do something like show me everything that, can you see? Oh, wait a minute. I'm not even sharing my screen.
I was about to ask.
I'm sitting here doing all this stuff and said, okay, can you see that?
Yes.
I can make it bigger if you want.
That looks fine.
Okay. So if I do a get command, right? It shows me everything on my system. I can come back up and say GCM star. Have you done this with wildcards? Dash item, right?
Yeah.
And what this does, it shows me everything, all the commands in my session that end with item, right?
Okay.
And then so that's kind of helpful. And then I can do things like, well, show me everything on my system that starts with new, right? So if I'm looking for something, this is a good way to do it. Now, I can also do, let's talk about modules. So the import Excel module, right? There's something called get module. So if you start moving into using modules, these commandlets, these functions are going to be important. So like I could do again, and I can say that list available, and then I can say import Excel, and I can tab complete on that. So if you know, if I type in YYZ and I hit tab, it doesn't give me anything. I know it's like, okay, I thought I had my module installed, but I didn't. So let's go back. So if I do import Excel, this shows me every stuff. So you can actually do this on what your system with Excel installed. And then you can be looking for your own modules if you start to develop those. So you can see it says module type, the version, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, if I do I can, you know, the FL command for format list.
No, that's a new one to me.
Cool. So now what I'm going to do is if I do an import Excel, if I look at that, it gives me that data like in a row of a table. If I do an FL, it actually does it as a list rather than does vertical rather than horizontal. So PowerShell will actually look at the stuff that you're typing or in your script or at the command line. And when it tries to output it, it'll try to fit it to the screen. So you may not always see something. So if you pipe it to FL, which is format hyphen list, it takes that information and it transposes it, so to speak. So here I can start seeing like, oh, I can see the exported aliases in the Excel module. Here's all the exported functions. So this is really helpful, like if you're using different kinds of modules, either yours or somebody else's or a third party. So these are important things to learn. So I know you said you programmed in C. Have you programmed in an object-oriented language besides PowerShell?
C and PowerShell are the only languages that I've touched.
Okay, cool. So let's just go over that for a minute. So I can also take the get module and I can just set it to a variable, right? So now instead of printing out, I've stored all the information about my module in the variable info, right? And I can do the FL on it. Now you see how it has all this information here, like has the property names like name, path, and description.
Yeah.
So objects. So when I do a get module, it actually returns an object with property names. So an object is an instance of something. Let me know if this doesn't make sense. So it's an object is an instance of something, and that object can actually have properties, and it can have methods that you can call to operate on things. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So we have the info. Now what I can do is I can say, okay, well, I want to look at just path. So I can use dot notation to look at the specific property information on an object. Does that kind of make sense?
No, that makes sense.
Cool.
So
So
just narrowing it down.
exactly. So when you do the select object that you do in your code, that works off the same idea. You're going to say, hey, I want to just take this object and I want to say, you know, I want to do a select and I want to just get the version and module type. So select object says, oh, since it's an object-oriented language, I'm going to take what's in the info, that object, and I'm just going to go pull out those properties. So it's a shorthand way of doing things. So understanding objects are super powerful in PowerShell. And it's different than Bash and all those languages, because those Linux and Bash, basically, it's all text. So you have to do more work to get to the information and then copy it and store it. In PowerShell, because it's object-based, it's one of the innovations that PowerShell brought to the table. So learning how to use objects is really, really important. Now, let's go back to $info. So the next thing you want to learn is, and keep in your back pocket, is something called get member. So there I have the $info on the module, and if I pipe it to get member, these are all the properties and what, as I said before, the methods that are on that object that I can actually do things with. I can call the clone method, or I can call these different properties here. Notice there's a ton of properties we didn't even see when I printed it out. So there are, the way objects are set up inside of PowerShell, depending on the module, you can hide variables that don't get displayed, that somebody has to actually go look for them, so the display doesn't get all cluttered up. So, and that depends on the author of the module, et cetera, et cetera. But that's why something like, that's why get member is so important. So if I were to do something like, you use get, I don't know if you use get process.
No, I haven't used that one yet.
That's cool. That's more system admin stuff, but so these are all the processes running on my machine, right? So,
oh, like the CPU usage?
yeah, it'll show you the CPU count. Not so much usage, but like how much CPU something is using in terms of memory. Yeah, so a little bit of CPU usage, but yeah, that's the general idea. So now that's an array of objects. Do you know how to index into an array in PowerShell?
No.
So I think it's, so if I say $P, I see all of them, but I can actually use this notation, $P subscript 0. So it says, give me the first element, it's 0 based.
Oh, so you're just talking about pulling, selecting like one specific part of an array, right?
You got it.
Okay. The terminology is what confused me there. You can also comma it and like select a range, so you could go 0 to 5.
Yep. And that would be more like this, 0 ...
Yeah.
So that's array slicing. That's exactly correct. And the cool thing is that exists in many different languages. So if I come back to 0, I can, GM is an alias for get member. So this is all the stuff I can do on a process in my system, right? It tells me, oh, it's a system diagnostic process. These are some of the alias properties, excuse me. This is an event, and these are methods, and here's some more properties. And there's things like property sets and script properties that also exist in the PowerShell system. So you can inspect a particular object to figure out what's going on. Okay, so get member is your friend, and it works based off on the concept of PowerShell has objects with properties and methods, et cetera, in the system. If you know a little bit about object-oriented programming, you don't have to go down the rabbit hole on that a lot. But if you know a little bit about it, it can help you with understanding PowerShell better. All right. I think that was some of the basics. Any questions? Was that too much wrong terminologies?
No, I think it's fine. Even the terminologies that I didn't know, when you showed me the example, it all lined up. I do have a question though. How often do you use aliases in your own PowerShell usage?
You mean use it like at the command line or in my scripts, or do I create them?
More the first two. How often do you use them in your scripts in the command line?
Good question. So this is going to be so I use aliases on the command line a lot because if I start doing stuff like this, if I type in get member, right? So notice I typed in get m and I hit tab. So PowerShell says, oh, let me look that up, and it finds Markdown first. So there's a lot of get -m's in the system, and that slows me down. But if I type in GM, I'm typing in 2 keystrokes, so I have less chance of making an error. So I like to use aliases at the command line when I'm trying to figure things out. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The main reason for me asking that question is with all the sources, I have several sources that I learned PowerShell from, but with a lot of the sources I learned it from, they were saying for beginner level programmers to stay as far away from aliases as possible.
So that brings to the next point. Yes, I don't ship modules or scripts to other people or use myself. I don't use aliases in my scripts because when I look at it later, right, I don't remember what the aliases mean, right? As you start building more and more scripts and modules, you're going to have so many things that you're not going to remember like, oh, what was this IPMO thing that I wrote, right? But if you spell it out inside your script, life is a lot easier when you come back to it and you read it and try to understand what's going on. So I use it at the command line, excuse me, all the time. But in my scripts, I don't leave aliases. I don't leave them in my scripts at all. Does that help?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
So
Do you still have the bomb generator file?
yeah, should I get rid of that?
It's not really, I don't think there's anything super sensitive in here. But if
I
this
think
is,
yeah, go ahead.
if this is gonna be posted on YouTube, I don't think we should be going through this.
Okay, that's a good point. Well, I'm going to post it so that if only if you have the link, you can get to it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with unlisted videos.
Okay. So, but I hear what you're saying, and I absolutely agree. So, so the other thing, so this is Visual Studio Code. And one of the things that's nice, I like inside of there's many things I like about Visual Studio Code, but let's say I was doing like $A and pipe it to get member, right? Let's say that I left that in my script. There's something in here. So if you press F1 inside of Visual Studio Code, you get what they call the command palette. And this is all the different commands that exist inside of that are available to you that you can, that you can click on and make things work inside of Visual Studio Code. And it's based on the extensions that you put in. So since you have PowerShell, PowerShell's extension is installed, there's something in there called expand alias, right? So you can see it's the second one down, PowerShell expand alias. And so watch what happens to GM. I hit F1 and I say expand alias, and it expanded GM to get member. So let's go back and just really do that quickly. Let's say I want to do a GM, and then I want to do a format list, and I'll expand the aliases again, and it expands all the aliases in the entire script. So I might use aliases when I'm working out a script, and at the end, I'll just do something called expand alias and off to the races. So that just a little tidbit. All right. So you want to talk? What do you think? You want to?
That's a really good tool right there.
Yeah, I think so. And these kind of things, we used to build these as for ICE. ICE had plugin capabilities, and before Visual Studio Code came along, we were writing things like this for ICE. But then once Visual Studio Code started taking off, most of us shifted over and started, looking at the different capabilities. Yeah. So, and the other thing I wanted to show you in here, let's say I created a function called YYZ, or we'll call it greet, and it says hello. So have you built functions in PowerShell?
Yes, so I have, but I haven't really used it that much as I really need to be.
You'll get there. You'll get there. So you should use the word function as a statement, as a keyword, and then you name your function. And this goes in between two curly braces. We call that a script block. And inside that function, we can do any kind of PowerShell that we want. This one is just going to come up and say, return the word hello. And if I actually press F5 here, you'll see a console pop up. Do it again. And the console, you can see it actually dumps what's in the screen out to the console. And if I call greet, we should get the word hello, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And I could put a parameter on here. And I can put a param on that. I can even make it a default. I can say, do hello world. So when I run that again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear the screen so we can just get the results. So it says hello world, or I can pass it whatever I want, and it says hello Adam. Right?
Okay.
So that's functions. But what's really cool too is, let's say I had my 800 line script, right? And I'm just going to put a bunch of, depending on putting comments in my code. So now if I'm in my script, right, and I'm down here, and I might call greet in several places in my script. It's like, oh, well, what did I, what did greet do? I don't remember. So some really cool things that Visual Studio Code has that ICE doesn't have. I can hover over the word greet over my function. If I hit the right mouse click, I can do stuff like find all references, right? Oops. Even better, I can say things like go to definition, right? See that up here on the top?
Mm-hmm.
And what it does, it takes me back in the file where it is. So it's a way, and this works with variables, and it works with functions and all that kind of stuff. So I can be all over my 800 line script, and then I can right mouse click on what I'm looking for. I can say, well, show me the definition, show me the references, or I can even say, I can say peek the definition, and it in line shows me, oh, it's on line 3. And then if I double click on it, it'll take me to it where I want it, where it actually was defined.
Can you edit it from that peak?
You won't be able. That's a good question. I don't think I've. Yep.
Wow.
So I definitely recommend using VS Code because it has so many different developer tools that you as an editor, it's like, wow, I wouldn't even think that I would have built something like that. Okay. And then there's a ton of things to learn. There's a ton of things to explore. And it'll take quite a, learn what you can, keep an eye on YouTube's and what's going on. And, I don't know what other sources you use to learn about stuff, but definitely put Visual Studio Code on your list of things to continue to learn over time. Okay.
Okay.
So, and there's so much more that you can do. We just did like 3 different things. There's thousands of stuff that you can do here. As well as the fact that you have, I think how did you check in your code when you built the GitHub repo the other day?
You mean how was I able to check it?
Well, you checked it, you created a repo, then you put the file in there, right?
So are you saying that there's a way you can import the GitHub file directly into VS Code?
Well, you don't import it. So if I pulled it down, right? Mm-hmm. So when you just run Visual Studio Code, you should have GitHub I believe is a default extension that you have. And it will look in your local folder and say, oh, this is a Git repo. And then it has all this magical extensions that you can work with GitHub. So this little control here shows me all the changes that I have in that file. These are some examples I was building up that I'm going to share with you. So yeah, and if I wanted to here, I could actually make a message and say, this is, info. If I wanted to commit it, I could say info for Adam. And I could say commit, and then I could say sync it to my repo in GitHub, all right here inside of Visual Studio Code. So when you checked it in, did you do it from the command line? You did a git push or something like that?
No, not at all. I just found the path on my computer and I checked it in that way.
Okay. So this is fully integrated with Git, and there's a lot of features there. So those are just some of the, again, things that ICE doesn't have and that Visual Studio has out of the box. Okay. So do you want to talk, so I think that's good. We're 27 minutes in or so. So you want to talk about hash tables?
Yes.
Excellent. Do you mind me typing, or do you want to type and do things?
You can continue.
Okay. So I just brought up a new file.
Good host so far.
Excellent. So we talked about if statements, and then I brought up switch statement, and I brought up hash tables, and you want to do hash tables. So, and it's kind of funny because some people are saying, yeah, if statements are faster than hash tables, and in certain ways they are. But yes, as your code grows, all of a sudden you have 17,000 if statements for all your SKUs, and it gets It's like, oh, how am I going to manage this? So let's talk about hash tables. So I'll say $H equals. Can you see that? It's good.
Yep.
Excuse me. Sorry. So by doing an @ open brace, open curly brace, close curly brace, that defines an empty hash table. Okay.
Okay.
So what does that mean? So now if I do a $H, right? So I just created it. I'm going to run this. Get rid of that. And you can see nothing gets displayed. Right?
Well, there's no content yet.
Exactly. So there's a couple of ways you can work that out. I can say something like A equals 1. Okay. And now the hash table has a key value pair. You're familiar with key value pairs?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So this is a key value pair, and the key is A, and the value is 1. I can add additional stuff. I can say B equals tests. I can mix numerics and alpha values, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do one that's kind of fun. I'm gonna do, yep, let's do that. So I can actually add an array. So you know you should use the @ open curly open paren, right? I've seen it. I think I saw it in your code.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates an array. So when I run it, you can see the visual. I have the test, and then I see the value here for C. And when I see the curly braces like that as a value in a hash table, I know it's an array. More fun, we can put a hash table inside a hash table if you want. And we're going to kick it up one more notch. Let's make another one. I'm going to say equals get process. So let's do it via what we did before. Get module list import cell. So what do you think goes in E? Sorry, I didn't mean to give you a pop quiz.
No, you're fine. So list available. It's going to be the information for the module. I'm not 100% sure what.
Yep.
What
exactly
information?
Correct. So that's exactly correct. So now here you see it has import Excel, but the way that you get to an action, now let's take two things we're going to see. We're going to see what's in E, and the way you can do that is you can say $H, $H.E.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm notating into the key and getting the value. Now notice, you see what it printed. So it actually stored the results, that object that result that we stored in the command line into a hash table. So you can so if you wanted to read an Excel file, you could do import Excel, and then you could set it up and say, I want to read sheet A, sheet B, sheet D. I can set those all up in a hash table if I wanted to. And then, so that's how you want to begin to start thinking about hash tables. Okay. So you set up some data, and the way you start accessing it is that if I want to print out what's in A, and there's another notation you can do, depends on how you like it. I can also say what's in B. So if I run this, okay, I'm printing out A is 1 and B is test. So this is how you access the information inside of a hash table. It looks up the key, right? And then it returns that result. Now that's the same way that you're going to do things like if you want to change the values. So let's say, so down here, if I want to say H.C, right, there's the array 1, 2, 3. I can also say, set that to new stuff as a, right? So I'm setting the right-hand side into that key inside of the hash table, right? And if I print it out, it's no longer an array, it's what I just set it to. So it works like a variable, but you have a couple of extra steps. You have to say, here's the hash table dot, here's the key, and then I can either print it out, I can add, I can do mathematics on it, I can change it, and I can just reset it to something else. Does that make sense?
It does.
Excellent. So that's the way that works. Now, so back to your skew concept. Here's one of the, so not everything that you have is pros and cons to using these data structures. So one of the things is, let's say I wanted to, let's see what happens if I say, so I don't have a key called test, right? So when I run it, notice it just doesn't print anything. So let's say somebody typed in a skew and you went to use the hash table to look it up. It doesn't come back with anything. So let's call this result. We'll run this. And if I come down here and type result, I don't have anything. If I change this to A, the result is 1. So if the hash table can't find the key, it just returns null. It doesn't have an error. It doesn't say, oh, key not found. You have to do that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good example. The only thing is in the actual module that or the program that I'm making, we don't use a hash table. I try to use the Excel file as much as possible because for one, it's more user friendly to edit, and for two, it's a lot less. Like I said, there's endless possibilities on what these skews could come together and make, because it's multiple numeric variables and also alphanumeric variables as well. So it doesn't make as much sense to put it in a hash, but I was going to ask you a question to see if it can work for something that I want to use it for.
Yeah.
So
well,
let's say
I just wanted to point out that the key thing is they're great to use, but if it doesn't find the values, if it doesn't find the key, it doesn't give you an error. You have to do something like this: if result, then right found, otherwise right not found. So you have to handle that error, that not found condition on your own in your code. Go ahead. So your question?
So I don't know what the technical term for this, but that variable that PowerShell gives you, the PS drive or the $_ that one.
Oh yeah.
What is that called?
Okay. So if I have 1, 2, 3, right, I'm going to pipe into for each. That's an alias as well as the percent sign. So you're asking, what does this mean, right?
I know what it means, but how would you, if you were to talk to another programmer, how would you call that?
I would call it the $_ variable.
Okay.
That actually just says it's the current item in the pipeline is where we typically use it. So
let's go back to that hash table real quick.
Mhm.
Couldn't you use the $_ variable as, like, you go to the H and you do $_ variable, and then I'm trying to figure out how you would need to word this.
So you kind of like want to loop over the keys, you're thinking? Okay, so that's a good question. Let's go take it to the next step. You have to do a little bit extra stuff with hash tables because you do something called get enumerator. And then you can say $_.key.
Okay.
And then that prints out all the keys, right?
Alrighty.
Let's just take one more step before you can also say .value. And that prints out all the values, key value name, right? I'm not sure why I expected something different. Okay. That's because I have weird combinations of data types. So you can either say .value or .key using the get enumerator through a for loop, and then you can use a $_. Go ahead.
So I think I just was going about this the wrong way, but if we were to say, when this number exists, pull this variable or this value or this key, would you be able to do that using a hash table?
Can you say a little more? Yeah.
So user input comes in and you're trying to match it up with a with a specific number. It's got an expected number, so to speak.
So let's say, yeah, we can, let's call this 1, 2, 3, to A, something like this. This is kind of the example.
Yep.
And then they come in and they type 1, 2, 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then you can do something like $H, not $target. And you see it prints out A. Does that make sense? Is that along?
Yeah, that would work for what I was asking.
So now the problem is, what if I type in 1, 2, 3, 4? What do you think is going to print out?
Nothing.
You got it. So that's what I'm saying about that you need to handle, you'd have to handle that. So before printing it out, you'd have to do something like down here, if $H.target, if not, you write not found. So what this will do, it'll say not found. If I put the correct key in, it'll give me the value. Well, here it's saying found. And then I can actually say, I didn't, oh, I'm doing right host. All right, so I found A. Is that, but if I type in a target or a SKU or a number that's not there, you have to tell the user not found. You can look it up, but you have to then check what you get returned, the result that comes back. Does that make sense, or is that too much?
No, that's perfectly fine.
Cool. So then, yep, and that's how I would use it. Yep, so that's how that's how you use it. And hash tables are pretty quick in that one. In terms of that speed.
The way that I was initially described on hash tables versus arrays and variables is that hash tables are the best for really, really intensive and a lot of data, as opposed to an array just being like a quick list of something.
That is correct. If you were going to do this lookup, so this is an index type lookup, and hash tables have special properties underneath. They have how they actually can, they figure out, it figures out how to do the lookups. If you had an array of 1, 2, 3, you'd have to say, okay, give me the array, and I want to, where it contains the, A, or it can or has something like, I don't think we should go down this, but we'll do real hopefully quickly. We'll do one more. So if I have an array equals 1, 2, 3, let's do it this way. 1.10. So notice I didn't have to, I can use the range operator to create an array of numbers. If I want to find out if the number 5 is in there, let's see if this works. Okay. Now the thing is that it actually had to search the entire array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then oh, I got it, and then it continued searching the rest of it. So if you have a large array, it's going to be really slow if you're looking for an item. Whereas the hash table is an index lookup. So yes, what you read about arrays and hash tables is correct. Hash tables are faster.
I've been following a kind of like a course, but this is a course that I realize is kind of outdated. And that's where my knowledge of ISE is coming from.
Cool. No, yep. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. And lots of people continue to use ICE. One of the things is that if you go into a new company, or you're like in your company, did you load Visual Studio Code on your computer at work?
Yeah, I have it.
So there are companies like that don't let you install things like Visual Code on your local computer. So if you go to another company, or you're working with some people, they may not have access to Visual Studio Code, or you may not be allowed to install it. So you'd have to use ICE. So it comes out of the box, right? So when you install PowerShell, you get ICE. Anyway.
So funny tidbit of information on that. It's kind of off topic, but I think you'd find it amusing. So I'm in an interesting place at my work because the role I was given initially was not super IT based. Like the person before me did not do a lot of computer work. He was just like a spreadsheet guy. He recorded data, stuff like that. And I created the ability to make it more technical based using code and a bunch of different things that the guy never touched. So I have a degree in network administration, and my boss, I had to go through a long, hard fight with IT, basically just talking to them over and over again, like, hey, I need access to this. They had me in constrained language mode for the longest time in PowerShell. But needless to say, after a lot of emails back and forth and a lot of phone calls, I now have administrator and kernel access on that computer.
There you go. Absolutely. And when it comes to log, yep, that's a fair point for the folks in the IT, because they want to lock down your computer, because you can, once you have admin rights, you can do pretty much anything.
Mhm.
And, you know, if they have to support you or some other people that make accidental mistakes on your computer, they have to come and fix your computer. They don't want to do that, which is understandable. So that's cool. Yeah, that's exactly the point. So that you have admin rights is great, and then you can install these kinds of things. But you might get into a company where you have those conversations for months with the IT folks, and they never give you access.
Yep.
And then if you're like, oh, well, how am I going to edit my PowerShell scripts? And then, you know, knowing ICE or being able to work with ICE becomes important. Cool. Yeah, that's a funny. I love those stories.
It ended well. I'm pretty sure that when we move into the new office with all those guys, I'm going to get some dirty looks. But
well, the first when you if you run up, if something happens on your computer, which you know doesn't sound like you're going to do, but you might actually do something, and then your computer doesn't work exactly, and you're going to call them up, and you're going to say, hey, something's not working, and they're going to be like, oh, you're the guy that we gave admin rights to. Well, you're on your own. So that's possible. Cool. So we talked. What else would you like to? Anything else that you want to go down on?
So I'm not sure how much we can go into this, because I don't know if you have any mass Excel files that you can use for this kind of example, but I want to know your approach on querying Excel files and putting different cells and stuff like that into variables.
Okay. Let's do that.
So the statement that I use now, and I've used this one over and over again in my current code, it'd probably be smart to put this statement in a function somewhere and just kind of use variables to feed the nuances on how I use it throughout the script. But the function I'm using now is it's kind of similar to the one that you showed me. It starts with a variable, and then you pipe it to a select object.
Yep.
And then it goes equals another variable, and then where object, and then the header name of my Excel file, on which file where I want it to query. So it says, find this variable, which is the one this user entered, and match it with this row, and wherever you see this number, pull the cell from this header that matches that variable.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Well, it's kind of funny, and I'm trying to look and see if I think I looked at it when I was looking at your code. I was like, oh yeah, that I would have pulled those pieces out and made functions out of them. So let me see if I can. I don't know if I. So one of the cool things. Here we go. So yeah, I think I didn't. Yeah, I didn't have your data, so I was playing around with something else. But you noticed I clicked on this Excel file here, and it opened up with a grid.
That's nice.
So just as a note, I think it's the Grape City. I can't find a Grape. See if I can find it. Yeah, I have this one installed. So I clicked on this. This is on the left-hand side. these are all the extensions that are available that are installed in your Visual Studio Code that you can install, right? And you can also find a list of what else is out there. So I typed in Grave City, it's installed, and it's an Excel viewer, and you can also look at CSV files. So if you install this on your computer, since you have admin access, you can now click on Excel files that you have, and you can say, it'll open it up. And notice I have multiple sheets here. I have east, north, south, and west. So that's a good,
wonderful.
yeah. And you can edit the data, which is good and bad, right? So I come in here if I wanted to type that, and it would save it to the Excel file. So I use this a lot when I'm working with data. So back to your question. So let's see if I generated the data and read Excel. So I think I was looking along in your code. And I was like, okay, this is kind of trying to mock out what you were doing. So here's an import Excel and with a where object because I'm looking for a particular region, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at the mock data, so right, so I'm looking. This is kind of like I think your SKU or some of the data that you had shown me.
Similar, yeah.
Right. So let's see if I can just get rid of all these. We'll come back to right. And I gotta go to the right. This is one thing I don't like about it, but that's okay. What if I said script group? No, I didn't pass in the region. So if I'm running this from the command line, I can type in read Excel, and we'll see if we can get to east. So that used the where object and I figured, right? So I was able to go into that Excel spreadsheet, pull back the data, and get all the regions for east. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And can you expand property that?
Can I, what do you mean?
I think it's dash expand property.
Yeah, so what I'm doing here is I'm just bringing back the entire record from Excel. So let's run that again, and I'm going to store that into a variable at the command line. So $R has it. So now I can say something like, well, show me region. So now notice that PowerShell says, oh, I know it's an array. I'm just going to get that property on those objects, and it prints all of them out for me.
Okay.
So that makes it a little bit easier. And yes, I can come back here and say, select object, select, and I can say region. And then I can do the expand. And notice I don't have the header. So doing the select expand region is the same thing as doing this $R.region. So when you get your data back, and if you're doing a where, saying, okay, I just want this one specific thing, you can just store the entire record in a variable, and then rather than go typing it into a select, you can just start using the object notation for the properties that you want.
Okay.
And and the other thing is that while this is cool, the select, expand, and you're going to use that as you develop scripts over time, this is slower because once you start going over a pipe, it has to pass all that data across another boundary. So it's a slower operation, only because it has to get more pieces of PowerShell involved. Where like $R.region is almost like doing it's similar to doing a hash table lookup.
Okay.
So I hope I didn't go too far afield. You had other like creating a function to do some stuff out of it, or?
Since we're getting close to time here, I have one more thing that would help me tremendously. If you could show me a way to do it. I don't remember off the top of my head on how I handle this in my script. I'm pretty sure I can find my iteration of this if I dig through our many emails here.
Fair enough. We can go over time. Go ahead. Because we did start early with just chatting about some stuff, so we go a little past 10.
I feel like this will be something that's pretty fairly easy for you.
Probably. I've only been doing PowerShell for about a week now. Last weekend, I read a book called PowerShell in 24 Hours.
Oh, you didn't read the book PowerShell for Developers? I hear it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Unfortunately, a lot of those chapters are no longer valid because I was playing around with concepts that I thought were really cool, and some of those techniques don't work anymore. But yeah, it's got a lot of cool ideas in there.
I was gonna ask you because compared to you, I'm kind of late in the game. If that's still something that would be really relevant to this date and age.
Well, when I wrote the book, it was my first time writing, so I didn't know the idea of what they call greenfield writing, which means that you write a book in a way that it'll always stay current with the technology. I was just like, hey, I got a bunch of ideas, I can put them in a book, and O'Reilly said, this is great, we'll publish it. Have you heard of the book called PowerShell in a Month of Lunches?
No.
So that's a book. So my book was more of like a developer and how you could use PowerShell across many, many different things. So PowerShell in a Month of Lunches is by Manning, I believe. Yeah, it's from Manning, and it's by Don Jones, and Jeff Hicks. Jeff Hicks still publishes. He's on Twitter. He actually still teaches courses on PowerShell. He's been in PowerShell, I think, longer than I have. And so their book is a greenfield type development book about PowerShell, meaning that those are concepts that will hold true for PowerShell forever. So that's a book you want to consider.
Okay.
If you want to go really deep into how PowerShell works, there's another book called PowerShell in Action from Manning by Bruce Payette. Bruce Payette used to work at Microsoft. He basically was the guy who implemented everything in PowerShell. He implemented the language. So he wrote a book, and that's where I learned a ton of stuff. And then I was able to have access to him and talk about it. So initially, PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. If you want to go real deep dive, PowerShell in Action, and that's all the Manning books. And I'll send you those links to those later.
Okay. I found the line, by the way.
Okay.
So I'll give you a little bit of context to this. So a lot of times in my script, I use this because there are some variables that I need to pull from the Excel file that never change. They're always the same. I mean, realistically, I could just write the contents in a variable and it would work the same, but that's my handling of it right there.
Oh, where'd it go?
It's in the chat. Yeah.
Yep. I was looking at that. So, yeah, that's cool. So, what would you like to do? Okay.
Is there a better way to handle that? Like that's what I'm mainly getting at with that.
A better way in what sense?
I'm just kind of wondering because I feel like either the way that I've used it or the way that I'm calling that command, it could be problematic in the future.
Yeah. Well, if they move the data from C2 to C5, you're in trouble, right? Which they probably won't because it's probably been there for 20 years. So I remember, okay, so I need a little more context with me. So is there a possibility? So if you did an import Excel, which, has to read a bunch of stuff. So if I did that, whatever, test XLSX, and I wanted to do the worksheet, right? So that would read that entire worksheet into that variable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you could do the same thing. You could do C2. But does it have headers?
Yes.
But I'm assuming that so if you read this in, then you could use the same technique that I was talking about with the region, right? So then you could say, and how many rows are there on this sheet? Would you have to then do a lookup like, okay, I got my data, but then I have to do a where?
Like 30 or more.
Okay, so dollar data would be an array of all that data. Then you can do a where. I gotta know what the name of the header is, like where $_ skew
Yeah, you could use that.
1470 or something, right? Right. So what that would do, so you could read the data in once at the top of your script, right? And then you can say, okay, somebody passed in, user input. So now you know what record you're dealing with. Then I can say, instead of saying $C2, I can say $records. Now I only have one record if I find it. If I find 1470, and then I can say .name. Does that help or no?
Yeah, that helps a lot actually.
And then this is something I would put into a function. Right, so you could read all your data in one time at the start of the script, right? And then depending on the input, you can go after each. You have a function that says get hyphen whatever skew details, and then you could pass in whatever the user input is, and then you just get back the information you need, and you don't have to do selects and expands. You can just return the record.name. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's and then that's what I would start to do. And then what's interesting is that you have more concise code, and then you're gonna find at some point, I believe, you'll start finding that you're gonna start finding that, oh, I can reuse these things, or you'll start chaining together different functions, or making additional functions so that your code is pretty compact, the actual execution of what you're trying to do, the actual full script that runs, because you're just using the same function over and over again. So, heading towards functions will make your life easier. And then if you actually have an error in this function, like, oh, I didn't return the proper stuff, or I want to return more information, you only have to go one place and then update that one function rather than doing it all across the if statements in your code. If that makes sense.
No, it definitely does.
Cool. Awesome. So as we begin to start wrapping up, anything else that I can clarify or go a little deeper on, or you have something else you want to figure out?
No, I think that's pretty good. You definitely gave me a lot of information. This is a kind of off-topic question, but being that PowerShell doesn't really have a certification, what would you recommend for somebody to be able to market that skill in their career?
So marketing that you're a PowerShell person?
Yeah.
Good question. So, yes, certs are not really my certifications of these things are not really in my wheelhouse. But my opinion is, if you're good, I would put it on my resume.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm a PowerShell. So PowerShell kind of like falls in multiple categories. You could be a PowerShell person that just kind of uses it to make your job life easier. Then there's a IT pro perspective where, okay, I'm an IT pro. I can do all kind of network administration. I can manage machines. I can do installs of patches and whatnot, and I can use PowerShell in that space. So that's an IT pro type. And then there's you can do that, or you can be a PowerShell developer, which is somebody who builds scripts and modules for other people to use to solve problems, and that you can use to solve. So if you're going for a job, I would just put that on my resume or in my LinkedIn or wherever you are out in the world, saying that you do PowerShell development. If whoever is you're talking to or whoever is looking, they should know that. If they don't, you probably don't want to work with them doing PowerShell. Because
That's a good point.
if they don't know that if they're in the know, they'll know there's no certifications in PowerShell. So it's up to them to say, well, what do you know, I get stuff from LinkedIn because I put on there that I do PowerShell work and whatnot. But people, you know, who contact me, they don't go, well, what are your certifications in PowerShell? You know, we start to have a conversation deeper into the process without having to worry about certifications. So hope that helps.
Yeah. I just I know that with this project and the coming projects, because I'm the kind of make your life easy in PowerShell type of guy right now.
Excellent.
I feel like I'm gonna need to have something behind that if I want to use this skill in the future, and I definitely do, like for other employers and whatnot.
Yeah, I would put it on on the resume. Does that make sense? Or wherever, you know, if you could put it out electronically when you hang out your electronic shingle saying, hey, this is my capabilities and the PowerShell is one of them. And I would just actually, you know, keep in mind being able to put a single bullet point of systems that you built with PowerShell. Does that make sense? Like, you know, built without divulging what any intellectual property of previous companies, right? You know, I built modules and scripts that other people in my company to do inventory management. Let's say something like that.
Okay.
So, and then people who are looking for PowerShell, people will pick up on the fact that PowerShell is a keyword in your description, and then they'll be able to look and say, oh, you built inventory systems. Oh, you did Azure Functions. Oh, you did GitHub Actions. Oh, you were an IT pro and you did patch management. And they'll be able to figure that stuff out. And if somebody doesn't know what that is, again, not to cast dispersions on them, but if they don't know about that, then they're probably somebody you don't want to work with. They don't have enough knowledge about that company doesn't have enough knowledge about it. If they're going to go, well, I see you do PowerShell. What are your certifications? And you go, hey, it's a pleasure talking to you. That's what I would do.
That's a definitely some good advice there on that.
Okay.
I'm working on getting that gift card over to you right now.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Apparently you send it as an e-gift card, so you might get like a little, I don't know if it's like an animated thing or whatnot, but
perfectly fine.
Might get a little song and dance with it too.
And I just want to, you know, just kudos to you, given your age and given your experience, and for you to actually, a lot of people don't reach out to the maintainers of certain libraries because they're like, oh, they're too busy, or oh, I'm going to ask a question and they're going to be angry if I ask this kind of question. So people tend to not do that. The fact that you had the courage to do it and then follow up certain types of things, even to the point where you're willing to spend money of your own to hire, you know, I'll say the word, that an expert in this space, kudos to you. And that's exactly how you should continue with, you know, regardless if you use PowerShell or any other thing, to find the experts, pay them the money so that you can get a leg up as quickly as possible. And yeah, you do your own learning, but it's always good to have somebody who's gone through the minefield and figure these things out, to get that perspective and to spend the money for it. So kudos to you.
Well, there's a lot of things that go into that. So the first thing I would say is it never really hurts to ask somebody if they have time for something. It never hurts them, because the worst thing they'll say is no, I'm too busy. I learned that from my current job because I work in a weird environment. So I work in a sister company. It's kind of like me working for Infinity and the main brand is Nissan. So there's people who have somewhat invested interest in helping me, and other people who don't care, like they could literally care less.
Mhm.
And so I've had to, because I don't have like a whole lot of stuff that I go to other people for, because I'm kind of like the one-stop shop. Nobody else does anything IT related in my department. So it can be difficult. Wait, it says add promotion voucher. I don't need to add a promotion voucher to this. Order total. It says it's going to email it to you.
Okay, I'm bringing up my email. Probably take a couple of minutes.
I haven't submitted it yet. I'm trying to see what this
No rush.
use payment method. Okay, I think I just goofed something up on the payment method. Looks like it's going to work now.
Okay. Hilarious. Somebody, you know what Stack Overflow is?
I know a little bit about it. Yeah, I just sent it, by the way.
Thank you. I'll keep an eye on it, see if it pops up in my, which it probably will. Or see if it goes to my junk email. Hopefully not. So I think like years ago, I put something up about how to append stuff to a hash table, and somebody just now replied, made an edit saying, well, you should look at it this way, that way, or edited some pieces about it. So it's kind of funny. We're talking about hash tables and somebody's responding to a Stack Overflow I did years ago. So the universe is watching. Let me see when somebody responded yesterday. Oh, I don't see where. Anyway, awesome. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, people are not at work, don't care. If they're going to get something out of it, they'll help you. Otherwise, you're on your own. So I don't see anything. Yeah, it's probably, you can take like, I send people those gift cards too. It could take several minutes to get to them, but that's cool. I'll keep an eye out. If it doesn't come through, I will deal with it. But yeah, I think you're, learning PowerShell. I think PowerShell has been around for 20 years, believe it or not. And yeah, there's a lot of people that talk about it and they downplay it. It's a super useful tool. It's like Python. It's got different capabilities in Python that are better, and Python has different capabilities that are better than PowerShell. But learning this language is super helpful if you ever go into doing any other kind of programming, whether you go into C++ or C# or Go or Rust, whatever that path is going to be for you, or HTML or JavaScript. These concepts are, you're not going to have a pipeline in JavaScript, but dealing with variables, how do I look up things and all that kind of stuff, those are fundamental computer operations that you do when you're in development. So this is a worthy path.
Alrighty, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time because we're already a little bit over here, but
no, we're about right on time. We just spent the first 10 minutes. So yeah, cool. If you have any other questions, let me know. And if you want, you can fire emails over to me. They'll probably get more complicated because you won't be able to share what you're actually doing. So you'll have to talk in abstract terms. Yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions going forward, or things that don't make sense, shoot an email, and it'll be all good.
I sent you the receipt, by the way, for the gift card.
Okay.
If you needed like the order number or anything like that.
Interesting. I wonder why. Oh, there it is. Okay, I got yours, and I'll keep an eye out. Thank you for that, and thanks for being willing to go through all this. I hope it was helpful.
It definitely was.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Doug.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep. Enjoy your weekend, Doug.
You too. Talk to you.
All right. Bye.